And we're live with our 160th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined with my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey, how are you? No, I just welcome to the show. That's not how I start things out. Apparently, that's what we're doing today, Ken, because we're just all over the board. So, welcome back. 160 episodes feels kind of like a milestone, right? I don't know. Ken and I were talking before the show a little bit about how we've been stressed lately, right? Just like the stresses of work, family, life in general. And I know a couple of years ago I did this time of year is always tough, right? Like my wife always refers to it as the Januaries. Stress, cold, being stuck indoors, right? Especially in a cold climate, cold desert climate that I live in. That like we have a tendency, and Ken and I were talking about this, our personalities, we have a tendency to say yes to a whole lot of things and then overwhelm ourselves, right? Just with everything that's going on. So a couple of years ago, I did this time of year as well, I did a Twitter just poll and was asking people what they did to keep themselves sane in these in these sorts of situations, right? And I know one of the things is kind of setting those boundaries and being able to say no to stuff that isn't, I guess, critical to your career or to your mental health, right? Like having some sort of boundaries is always important. Having some sort of physical outlet, whether that's running, biking, jujitsu, something that you're doing personally that's there. But then I wonder, Ken, like what else do you do? Like, how do you get out of the, and I know you were talking about it just recently because things have been pretty busy for you. Like, how do you level set when you get to that point, when you feel like you're getting overwhelmed? What is it that you do?
Well, I guess probably also just identifying that point for me, like when I know that I withdraw and don't have communication with my friends as much as possible, and that occurs month over month, like that's something I noticed. That's probably always the first thing for me, is like when I get like less communicative with everyone in my life. Usually that's a sign that I'm like distancing to like go heads down, which has been, as you've witnessed, the case for several months now. And so first is recognizing that. So not just withdrawing, but also just, we were just talking about before, and you said we should go live with this conversation and be honest with folks about, these kind of moments. And then how, like you said, like how to make it, like we can make it productive for others by explaining how we get out of those situations. But so like I was telling you, when I wake up first thing in the morning and I'm like, just immediately like crap. I mean, and I'm getting up earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier and going to bed later and later and later. And I'm waking up and I'm going to bed and tired all the time, or going to bed and waking up, weird schedule, tired, and knowing like first thing when I wake up, I got to delve into things. Those are signs that it's like time to take a step back. So in those moments, I don't have the healthiest approach maybe, but I start saying no to everything. Literally anything and everything. Like if someone invites me out for a thing, I'm just like, nope. If, it's, can you lend a hand on this project? Nope. If it's, even if it's like, not even anything work related, it's just like anything. I'll just start saying no to a lot of things. And that's like the first step. But also like, I think, you and I are old enough to have gone through these cycles and recognize that they are just cycles where you get really busy, and knowing that they're temporary. And usually like for you and I know it's both, and it's for a lot of people watching this podcast too, and probably especially because of this industry, like most people are always trying to push themselves forward, right? So you're trying to learn more, do more, be a part of more. So usually it's best to see, okay, withdraw from the things that are extraneous and identify the core things like this podcast, the training we give, the After Dark episodes. Those are all things I enjoy and make me happy. And so those are the things I'll focus on. they're very impactful to me in my life and quality of life. But other things,
Yeah.
so you identify those things and you remain with those things and then remove the extraneous, but also just know it's a cycle. And if you're pushing yourself, you can recognize that it's just, you've taken on too much, complete those projects and take your foot off the pedal for a little bit and give yourself a breather. And also be kind to yourself, because that's easy to do, man. Like, that's easy to say to other people, but it is sometimes very hard to say to yourself, like, I'm good enough, I'm doing enough, it's okay. Like, take a breath. I mean, what about you? I mean, what do you do to for yourself?
It's okay to say no. Like, I'm with you. I don't always have the healthiest response, right? Sometimes
not you. I'm saying to me, not you.
Yeah. I mean, just in general, right? Like, it's very easy to just start ghosting people, right? Which is not fair at all, to people that are reaching out for help or whatever else. But like, I think just recognizing and giving yourself permission to say no, that's one of the hardest things, like growing up in a culture or in a, as a middle child where like it was always just assumed that you were along for the ride, right? Like, you have to make the best of whatever situation you're in. You're not allowed to say no, right? Like, it's just kind of expected that you're the, whatever, right? Like, you're the one that chips in, that you dive into whatever project it is. And being a high performer is a lot of that, right? Like, when those opportunities come along, you get depended upon because you are available and you are willing to jump in. But at some level, that takes a toll on your mental health. And like, I have found that just planning those breaks in and realizing, hey, you know what, right? So for us as a consulting firm, fourth quarter is just insane. And it always is. It always has been. And so like, I'm always very cognizant of what's next, right? All right, if fourth quarter is going to be bad, I'm going to build in some time after fourth quarter, because I know mentally I'm going to need it just to get interested in work again, just to get interested in life again, because the stuff that drops on the floor a lot of times is just stuff that's personal to me, right? Like, I'm always willing to sacrifice my mental health when everything else is happening, right? Like, I got to make sure that, an employee or whoever else gets the break that they need. But a lot of times that equates to, well, I didn't really get the break that I needed. And so I started to surround myself.
That's different for you, because that is specific to you, because you are a leader. You are the person that is ultimately, the buck stops with you. I mean, that's more, to me, that's harder. That's harder, because you're, like you said, you're trying to take care of the people that work for you, but then that can leave you with like not enough time for you. And then, then there's some guilt if you don't, do that for those folks, but then like some guilt if you don't do it for yourself. It's a trade-off. And
but I think it goes back to what you were saying, though, is just being honest with people, right? Like, I mean, we've learned that if you surround yourself with people that are just takers all the time, or narcissists, right, it just does not end well. And so like, having people that are on my team that, even though they're my employees, they're also like friends, and they're also like, they've got my back, right? I get pushed a lot of times on the same things, right? Because, we have whatever PTO or like actually taking a vacation, I've had, Justin, who works for me, like, oftentimes he'll just be like, dude, you got to take when are you taking your week off? Right? Like, you've got to do the same thing. Otherwise, like, we all suffer. And them recognizing that has made a huge difference in just my mental health and being able to come back from hard periods. Right? And I mean, honestly too, like with the pandemic and everything the last couple of years, right? Like, I don't know anybody that feels like they are their best selves right now. Right. It's just,
nobody,
I feel like we're getting back to it, but yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Nobody I know that is like, wow, like this has been the best year of my life, right? Like, it just
I think when 2022 came, I sat there and I'm just like, well, what the shit is this gonna bring? Like, I don't know what this like. I used to be optimistic, new year, new me. Now it's just like, crap. I hope it doesn't all fall apart, this year. So that's not a great way to start off a year. Not a great outlook. But
I don't know. I think we've all done that though. Like, it just needs like I don't know. Just a reset, right? I feel like that's what's helpful to me is just a reset at times and being like, yeah, you know what? It is okay. I am going to go like for that run. I am going to go for that walk. That response can wait a half an hour. That response can wait an hour. No one's, it's not critical. Even though it needs to be done, there's more time in the day than that.
There are stupid things that I can do too, which is chip away at the small. Because that's the other thing. It's like when you've got a lot of big projects and then you have small, especially like personal life stuff, like I know it sounds stupid to people watching this, but like I haven't been able to get a haircut in 2 weeks because I've just been too busy. And like, it's the most satisfying thing to just go get a haircut, maybe get an oil change if you need it for your vehicle, whatever. Like those personal errands, they start to stack up and just completely adds to the already existing stress and anxiety of like having too many things on your plate. So when you chip away at those small things, I will say, like you said, take 30 minutes, take 45 minutes, chip away at a small thing. Like, even if you don't feel like you have the time, it does help. It really does. For me, anyways, it helps. So
yeah, it's a matter of managing that list of to-dos, right? Like, and whether that's work or personal to-dos or whatever. I don't know. Yeah. I was going to recommend you just need, your child to grow up a little faster. Having a teenager that you can throw $10 at to go wash the car is an amazing thing. But
I started doing it a little differently. We've started taking money and putting it into Bitcoin and Ethereum for him. So he's got a little account I set up for him that I own and manage, obviously. But I'm like, man, like, but similar idea, right? But yeah, he's not old enough to do the big stuff yet. So, but no, I mean, I think it's healthy to talk about.
You're not buying NFTs for him? I don't understand.
So you joke, but I actually have looked into some NFTs, especially around metaverse, because I was like looking at sorry, I got distracted. Thank you to the congratulations there on episode 160. Thank you very much for that. No, so like with metaverse and thinking about, how are you going to keep possessions in the metaverse? Like, you're presumably going to have digital possessions, right? So how do you keep those tied to your identity and things like that? And NFTs, even though right now it's pretty dumb and we joke about it and everything, I think NFTs may play a pretty big part in that. And so I've been looking at a few companies that are doing it around NFTs and cryptocurrency to sort of just get ahead of that and maybe invest in things that might be useful currencies within the metaverse. Because as much as we're going to shit on it and make fun of it, and 100% we will, it's actually pretty cool. And we really should invest in things like around that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when it all goes digital, right? Like, and to be fair, right, to those companies too, right? We've definitely, I've done, code reviews for NFT NFT platforms and other things like that, right? Like, it's, they're definitely out there. It's an interesting use case. But yeah, from a pure like ridiculousness perspective, it's also kind of fun. And I don't we're getting away from the, how to keep your life sane, but it's all about keeping yourself interested too, right? So, finding something else to maybe concentrate on for a little while is not necessarily a bad thing. So
people may not know it, or I'm sure some people realize it or have heard us talk about it, but this podcast is also a way for us to catch up when our lives are busy. And that's the thing about this podcast is it helps to me. It does provide some balance and forces me to take it. That's why this morning when you were talking and I was just like, oh man, I'm crushed. You're like, well, you're able to do it. And I'm like, we should do it. We should do it because this is the reason, because even when I feel like you don't have time, you don't have this, that, and the other, take a step back and reconnect with, and like you're one of my closest friends, if not my closest friends. So
Yeah.
having these conversations with you, even though it's like public and all that stuff, it's helpful. So connect
No,
with
it
friends
definitely
when you're
is, right?
stressed.
Like, yeah, and I don't know, I can't tell you the number of times too, like to that point, right? Just having a discussion, like our public discussion here, and having that time set aside has re-energized me to be able to just be like, all right, we can do this, right? Like I can get back to it. We're gonna be okay. It doesn't, just reframes kind of the importance and the priority of different things. But
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I'm with you on the, what happens when I get stressed, like ghosting people, disconnecting from friends. That's where I mean, having this on the calendar is great, right? But
Yeah, I
like
know.
not talking to the people that I have in the past, right? Or doing the things that I love to do because I am too stressed. Those are
Yeah.
always clear signals to me that it's time to do a reset. So
Yeah, I've got this Lego sweet ass Batmobile Lego behind
oh, you
me,
haven't
the
done it yet.
classic 1989 one, and I still haven't done it. And that's my ultimate reminder every day that like there's too much going on in life if I can't work on that thing. So, anyways,
Yeah.
but yeah, man, like yeah, I think well, and so I used to have and I should really redo these, set it up again. We just Chris was traveling a lot. Chris Gates was traveling a lot, and I was busy. And but he's like my in person, contact, like physical contact. See him, go out to eat and stuff like that. And so we would do those luncheons. We haven't done them in a few months, like I said, but for years now we've done like regular lunches so that we can just have somebody else to talk to bounce your work off of, to just get reinvigorated about, technology, what you do for a living. Like every time I talk to like you or Chris or Rob or anybody, right? Like Mike, whoever, about
Yeah.
what we do, I end up inevitably like wanting to do it again, and or not do it again, but do more of it again is what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Dig back in. Well, and I mean, to that point, as soon as we started talking about this, I pulled up. So Chris has that talk that he gave a couple of years ago called Hacking Your Happiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's just a great kind of like, hey, how do you stay sane? Like not even, necessarily that security related, but how do you stay sane?
Yeah.
Let me see.
How do you
I'm
do
gonna,
it?
yeah. Yeah.
And really, I
Yeah. Let me
like
post
to
it.
premise it. We have good lives in this industry, like we have, but the thing is there's a lot of opportunity too for like helping people out, contributing to something, doing talks, doing projects. Like there's always opportunity to, and obviously the farther and further into this journey that you get, the more of those opportunities crop up literally all the time, and it really becomes a cost benefit analysis constantly of like where do I want to, and but then sometimes it's more of just you want to do something for a friend or help someone out, and that you can do it, and they need the help, and that's a hard one too, to say no to friends. And anyways, so I think it's unique to us, not that it's a stressful and you can have positive stress. I think it's a positive stress is what I'm trying to say. It's not like a, oh
Yeah.
God, poor me type thing. Not that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's more of the busy, it's a good stress to have, but there still has
Yeah.
to be an outlet. That's all. So, whoa.
Yep.
Good.
What's
Well,
this?
all right.
Oh, that's the Hacking Happiness, the Vimeo thing here.
Yeah. Yeah. That Vimeo is that's the Hacking Your Happiness. That's Chris's presentation they gave on that. It's always a good reminder. And Chris is he's an especially good person to talk to about that stuff, right? He's got a good head on his shoulders, and I know he's been through it as well. Cool. So otherwise, all right. So getting into some of the stuff that we wanted to talk about, I did want to post up there KernelCon code review again. Actually seeing people in person, right?
Yeah.
We're going to be doing
steaks.
Exactly, Omaha Steaks. So come to the code review course. Come take it. First time we've done it in person for a while. Well, yeah, since before the pandemic. We've done some online trainings, but much prefer it in person. There's a lot that goes on, especially the workshop is super fun that second day. when we review open source code, like we do at the After Dark episodes, but in small groups. And, yeah. But
did I mention the cash only breakfast place there in Omaha?
No, you didn't.
Yeah, there's I think it's cash only. Yeah, man, it's for like $12 you can get everything, just everything on the menu, all the eggs and bacon, all of that. Like, it's so good. Like, you'll see. Anyways, I can't wait. It's gonna be fun. We're gonna see some people again. We're gonna eat good. It's gonna be a good time. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, so come join us, right? Like, I mean, especially KernelCon in of itself, the training's before the conference, but it looks like it's going to be a great conference as well. Yeah, Adam and those guys, they do a good job. So come join us. That's all I'm saying. That's all I wanted to say, right? If you're interested in the course, this would be a great place to pick it up and support KernelCon, and yeah, and we'll all go out and have steaks or breakfast food, apparently.
Or both
at the same time, one after the other. Downtown Omaha is pretty cool. So
the keynote, did you see that note? There's a keynote speaker.
Oh,
that was just announced for KernelCon.
Sweet.
Sorry.
Oh, it's Joe Grand. Sweet.
Nice. Cool.
I did. Well, I just pulled it up. So the current keynote there, Joe Grand, years ago. So Kingpin, yeah. Like, he was the original. Yeah, it says there. Yep. Original designer of the electronic badge for DEF CON. So if you were there a few years ago, right, it was his badges that were being used as, for all of the DEF CON craziness that happens, as far as like the CTF, the badge challenges, fun stuff. So that should be interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I don't know if there's, I don't know what else they've announced. Yeah. Stay tuned. So they haven't announced any other talks, but there's other training as well. But if you're going to go, you should come to our training, right? If you're going to do training, that's all.
No bias. No bias at all.
No bias at all. Yeah. Cool.
So which of these articles do you want to start with?
I don't know. Like, what I know last week we didn't get to, maybe we'll start with that. I don't know. Yeah. Take your pick. Why don't you take your pick? I'll make you decide. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. You gave a bunch. I mean, it could be like, well, let's start with the easy one, the lock files. How about that? The SemGrep Teams blog post, which I guess I'll copy and paste into here. Do you want to give a summary of that? Basically them talking about lock files and the background and use and all that.
Yeah. So, I mean, any developers are very familiar with lock files, right? Well, they should be, right? But basically a lock file is, so packages, yeah. Oh, so there's like a pip file.lock, there's a package JSON.lock, right? These lock files tell the software what versions of third-party dependencies are to be used for that package. And specifically, like, you can specify the hashes that are associated with those packages, so you're getting exactly what you expect out of the package repositories in order to run your software. So it's almost like a mini software bill of materials, right? Because it not only locks the specific, first order dependencies, but subsequent dependencies as well. So if, the examples that you've got there, like if you're depending on, a version of React, let's say, a specific version, it's going to lock that version, but it's also going to lock the versions underneath it that it depends on. Makes it very easy for, and this is what most of the software composition and analysis tools use to do their vulnerability lookups. Right? They're looking at the lock file because it can see basically everything that that package depends upon, what the specific versions are, and then they just have to match and replace. It makes it fairly easy for that. So hence the reason that it's so critical for software or for supply chain security, right? If you're not using a lock file, if you don't want to have one that's in there, You may not necessarily get what you expect when you run an application. Specifically, some of the Python, if you're just doing a pip install requirements.txt, right? Like you're going to pull whatever packages are in there, and they may or may not be locked to a specific version. They may be locked to a version greater than X or above X, something like that, which could have other problems associated with it, realistically. Did I give a good enough explanation there, Ken, or am I just rambling?
No, I mean, I think so. To add to what you're saying, I think there were a couple points. One point that was most interesting to me brought up in this blog post was that there's arguments against using lock files, which I don't. This is interesting to me because I've never seen. I really have never seen an enterprise, or I shouldn't say an enterprise, an organization that's developing, code that and pushing to prod that hasn't locked their dependencies, because there's easily ways for things to. Well, I guess there's an argument for if you have enough test coverage, perhaps it'll catch any or most occurrences of breakage if the dependency version is. Has been updated, has changed, and is obviously different because it's changed. You could make the argument, I suppose, that a comprehensive test suite would catch any breakage in CI/CD prior to pushing to prod, maybe, but I can't imagine. And I guess the argument for that is that you're always going to have the most up-to-date packages, which is true, but also if a vulnerable version, like a malicious version, is introduced in a newer version, you're going to also download that. So I don't know if that's the strongest argument for not locking your files, truthfully. I would definitely opt for locking to specific versions. Now, in a lot of these I should say in the several that I pay attention to closely, there is the ability to overwrite previous so like, say it's version 1.1.1, and you can overwrite it and still have it published as 1.1.1 by unpublishing and republishing in some cases. It's not truly often immutable, is what I'm trying to say. So even if you're pinned to a specific version, it's not completely impossible to overwrite in some ecosystems the version you're pinned to, if I'm an attacker. But even still, I don't know, man, that seems, there's definitely some like tooling too that you can use to see if there's some differences there, and popular paid for products that will help out there. So those arguments seem kind of weird and weak to me. But having said that, like, I would actually be interested, just because that's my like narrow kind of world view and experience. I would love if somebody had a strong argument for not pinning to packages. Like, I would be interested in hearing their opinion for sure, because that just in that article, it didn't seem like strong enough to me to. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I
don't see the reason.
Yeah, I think a lot of those, right, like the arguments against them are just come from kind of the fear of the unknown, right? Is, oh, you'll be stuck on old versions, that first one, right? Like, yes, you're right, but there are instances where you want the old version over the new version.
100%.
Especially with CI/CD, right? Like, you're not always getting.
But you can upgrade.
Yeah,
like, it's like, you can always. Exactly. The difference is you get a choice of upgrading versus.
Yeah, it just takes discipline, right? Like it's being forced to be disciplined about upgrading those packages. I think that's where that one runs to.
I mean, there are certain tools like dependency graph that certain companies, GitHub, definitely offer, that can tell you you've got outdated dependencies, and you can perform an update there manually. I'm not sure why you. I don't know. Like, not sure why. I don't know, man. I have a hard time. I would be interested though if somebody has some perspective on that, of not pinning. The other things that are, I think, in that article, they talk about Well, they explain lock files, and that's, let's see, hold on. Sorry, there's something else I can't remember off the top of my head that I saw that was like, okay.
The ability to lock hashes is interesting, right? So
yeah,
like he did some analysis there on which ones you could actually lock to specific hashes. And I know you and I are pretty, like the package managers that we most often use, like pip, npm are probably the two biggest ones. Gradle for Java is one that I've used. You probably haven't as much, but you use Bundler, and it doesn't look like it has the ability to lock hashes right now, which is interesting to me, right? That's just never gotten to that point.
I think we've talked about it before, but these ecosystems also allow you to actually specify where the libraries you're downloading actually come from, which is not part of this article or even really like maybe relevant to the lock file aspect of it, but highly recommended. Just to reiterate that, if you hadn't heard that episode before, definitely, if you're using something like a Ruby Gems or npm or something like that, you can specify which specific libraries are downloading from what specific, because this comes into play again, Seth. And I mean, this is for everybody listening. This comes into play when you've got multiple package managers you're downloading your libraries from. So maybe you might have some internal libraries you've written, and you might have the rest like public, but you need to delineate which ones are private and public. That's a good time to use those protections those ecosystems offer.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything else though. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, my favorite part of that little table that's there is like where it's listing out what the package manager is, and you get to C/C++, and it's just with an exclamation point. That's my favorate part of that article. If you've ever tried to find libraries for C++, it just made me grin. So yeah, it's all good.
Good times. Yeah, it's like no,
it does not exist. Just no. Good luck. That's basically it. Cool. So next, let's let's introduce that. There's that new open source bug bounty, but I was gonna pull it from Portswigger's Daily Swig on the different bug bounty programs that are available, right?
Oh, there's an article too I don't want to forget about.
Okay.
That I gave
you want me to
for
post
last week. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry. No, that's not what I meant. What I mean is there's another article I didn't want to lose track of that I posted, I think over the weekend or late last week, about to you about what I learned from 220 IDOR reports, bug reports. So I just don't want to lose track of that. I'll put it into our private chat, and then that way we don't forget.
Okay. Yep. Pop it in there. All right. So this,
if we have time, that's totally fine. I don't care.
Yeah. So this article from Daily Swig, so from Portswigger, goes over all of kind of the bug bounty news for the last month, right? And the big thing here was the European Commission, right? That they launched another open source focused program dedicated to the different projects that they use and the different apps that they use for their public services. And that, follows up, like you can find that specifically too, right? The different applications that they're looking at. And this always harkens back to, like I always go back to our secure code review process when I look at these, because a lot of these apps aren't traditional kind of web applications where people are just going to be able to go, fire up Burp or some sort of scanner, go hit an application and go to town. It's going to take some actual, like, if you want to do dynamic testing of LibreOffice, right? Like, you're going to have to get to know what fuzzing is really like, right? Building a document that actually does fuzz testing or does fuzzing of the domain space, right? Like those things, those topics that Stefan always talks about as what testing looks like from a fuzz perspective, from a full domain perspective, from okay, there's all these different file inputs, these different APIs that are accessible. If you send someone a file, is there a way to, to use Redamsa or one of these other, tools to actually test out those APIs? It's a harder prospect than it is on some of the other bug bounty programs that we've looked at. But they are using Integrity, the Integrity bug bounty platform for that, right? Like if you look at what are the 5 different, the 5 different tools that they've called out. I already mentioned LibreOffice,
Mastodon, Odoo,
Mastodon.
CryptPad, Leos, and
Yeah,
I'm probably butchering every single abbreviation there, but whatever, or acronym, whatever.
Yeah, there could be some interesting bugs in those, like the open source social network. That's going to be different, right? Like there's going to be some, that one's probably more traditional as far as the bug bounty programs go. CryptPad, Leo, wow.
I'm trying to read in between the lines here so they have the bullet points. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt and skip around.
You're fine.
They have these bullet points here about what are they trying to accomplish with this? The program, and then these 5 things is the first kind of sort of inclusion there. But one of the bullet points is develop skills and recruiting expertise, and I'm trying to figure out are they? What is it how is this accomplishing? I'm not skeptical. I'm actually completely I'm trying to wrap my mind around. Does this mean recruiting bounty researchers and recruiting develop skills and recruiting expertise? Does that mean just recruit experts that are working on the program, or are they talking about getting experts in recruiting? I'm actually a little confused there. I would imagine it's recruiting security expertise to focus on this. I think.
I imagine that's what it is, right? Because
I am tired. But when I read that, I was like, that's the only one there. And I'm like, I don't understand it. Enable and create innovation with open source labs, increase outreach to communities, integrate open source and internal IT governance, ensure OSS security. Yeah. First concrete action of the latest OSS strategy for 2020 through 2023. It acts as a facilitator for activities outlined in the strategy. Cool. Yeah.
That's an interesting one, right? I like the fact that there's government is getting involved with securing of open source applications, right? I know there's been, arms in the US that have done this as well. But typically they're more focused on their own presence than they are on some of the open source projects or open source programs, applications that they use. So it'll be interesting to see how well this does, right? The funding's not huge, right? It's 200K, or 200,000 euros. But depending on what's actually found, it's going to uplift those projects across the board and should make things more secure. So I don't know. How do you feel about government getting involved in that, right? And funding that sort of research?
Well, I almost got arrested for giving the government bugs before, so that's pretty amazing that they're now not being like that. Of course, that was the U.S. government, not the European governments, but my trust in governments is not high to begin with. So I think it's cool that they're taking on this perspective. I think that this is okay, or this is easier to facilitate a program that has included these things because they're not. So for instance, let me juxtapose that against the Pentagon's bug bounty program, which was their live prod stuff in scope. Whereas this is here's some applications that are open source. They're not things we're running, in the sense of here's a URL that you can browse to, right? And you can just own our infrastructure if you find an issue. This is more structured, safer. I think this is a safe dipping of the toes into it Where it gets interesting is when you start to put things into scope that are running in production with assets listed in scope that people can just scan, run things against, because that's then when you see friction, and that's when you see the test of how resilient a bounty program really is. Whereas something like this is more low risk, I would say. So those are my thoughts on that.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. I always go back and forth because we've seen, I don't know, like putting on my tinfoil hat, right? Like the NSA getting involved with the DES algorithm early on, and the fact that they kind of backdoored that, right? Like, there's government agencies that definitely don't want. There was huge fights back in the early 2000s about encryption, right? And the fact that we had these like really great encryption protocols like AES and other things that, basically like the elliptical curve algorithms and all of that the US government didn't allow for export because they didn't want other countries to have them, right? Like, so it kind of goes back and forth for me, right? Like at times I put on my tinfoil hat and I'm like, ugh, I don't know, right? But like if it makes it more secure for everyone and gives people privacy, right? Like then I'm like, all right, that feels like a better use of the talent, right? Than it is to, hey, we're going to suppress this technology because it makes our life more difficult because people can be private, right? Like,
I mean, I'm all for the most amount of eyes on, especially to your point. I've thought about that a lot, that like, if I'm an open source developer and I'm building an encryption or hashing, or even something that has hashing and encryption inside of it, like, some library, and then somebody pipes up and wants to contribute, like that would immediately scare the crap out of me. And even if there's somebody who's well known, I would like always be a little suspect of who they're working for, and what nation state might be backing them, just because if, and I would be very, I don't know, I'd be very cautious. And I've always thought about that. Like, that's got to be a tough line to walk. So whenever you develop something like that and you have the whole world basically who has the opportunity to look at that code, that feels pretty good. Doesn't guarantee anything. I mean, we've seen 10-year-old bugs sitting in code that presumably millions of people have looked at, and it's like not discovered until one day it is, and it becomes like a critical thing. So I don't know where I was going with that, but I don't know, man. It's something I've always been very paranoid and thought about, is like, man, it's got to be really weird to develop those kind of things that have potential huge ramifications if someone introduces some sort of like backdoor weakness or something. Purposefully.
Well, I mean, we say that, but then like you look at software supply chain stuff and the how easy it is to insert, right? The post that we reviewed the last couple of weeks, how easy it is to insert malicious software, build a package, and then change it up, right? Mm-hmm. And have all of these dependencies on it. And we don't do. I'm sure there is somebody that's out there that's doing analysis of how many of those packages are getting vendored into government projects as well. And this is why I think both you and I target, supply chain as one of the targets this coming year, the coming future. It's an easier path in, right? Like if I take over an open source project that's popular, or make a post to it, and there's only like one set of eyes, one guy that's running it, and he pushes my pull request, I introduce a backdoor that gets pushed out to 500,000 packages that are dependent upon it, right? Like that's an easier path in than, hey, I'm targeting this public website that has all this scrutiny that we know all these pen testers have been against and the red teams have looked at, right? There's just the makeup of software is becoming a bigger target than anything else, because it is an easier path in. So I don't know.
Stuff I can't talk about publicly, but no, I'm going to add on to what you're saying, because there's stuff I can't there's some stuff I can't really talk about publicly, but I can say that we at GitHub have acknowledged that we are, whether intentional or not, have become a pretty significant part of the package distribution for certain languages. And with that realization comes some ideas about how to further enhance protections around some of those things. And so when the time is right, and I can talk about it, we will, definitely will. And probably my guess is we'll eventually release some blog post or something around it. So when that happens, we'll definitely share. But what you talked about is prescient. It's relevant.
Well, so I mean, and there was that news this week as well. I can't find there's the article, but what Google and Microsoft announced, $5 million to the Open Source Security Foundation, right? That specifically that Alpha Omega project that is supposed to improve global, supply chain security, right? Which is super interesting to me as well. I don't know, like maybe that's something that you can't talk about, but it's because I don't know how much you get involved with it. But like there are efforts in play and there's projects that people have spun up to actually to take care of some of that, or at least to start looking into it, to do further research into it, which is I mean, it's good to see. But it's I don't know. I like if somebody wants to really do some research, that's the place that we're going to see more and more focus. I guess that's where I'm going with it. From tinfoil hat
this is
to
something
like,
This is something being yes. The answer is yes, and 42. Yes. That's all I can say. But yes.
So wink if you need help, Ken, right? Like
blink twice. No, the OpenSSF bit there. Yeah. So that's all. Yes. Nods. Definitely been discussed for sure.
Well, let's see. Here's there's an article here. I'll post it up there too if people want to read it, right? The venture beat about how they've started to throw some more money at it. Cool. Good. All right. So let's see. That's integrity. That's software supply chain. Oh, let's talk IDOR, right? Before we forget about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So insecure direct object reference. This is the bug that I think, honestly, my whole, we run a consulting business. We find this all the time, right? Like it's probably in 90% of the applications that we look at in some form or another. Insecure direct object reference. It's it's an authorization issue. If someone can change the ID, and this is not for you, Ken, right? But the listeners, if someone can change an ID parameter and see somebody else's data, that's a bad thing. Depending on the application, it may or may not be a vulnerability, right? It's just the ability to change that object reference and see something else. But we do see it used as security by obscurity a lot of times. Hey, if I'm not going to click on a link and change the value of 1 to 2, but it's very easy to do. So what's the article, right? He looked at 220 different bug reports.
What is it? Yeah, reviewed 220 IDOR related reports from HackerOne. One of the key takeaways in the first part of the article is that the assumption a lot of times is it's ID value or something along those lines. Well, I don't know if that's an assumption. This is what they're saying, is that they assume the assumption is with most people that their view of IDOR is narrow, is what they actually say. Meaning, maybe it's like in the URL, there's an ID or just a numeric value, and you maybe sequentially iterate through that, and that's insecure direct object reference. I don't know if that's true for if that view is actually, I think that view is not necessarily held by everyone. I could see how if you're, especially if you live in the bug bounty world, and especially if you're in your first, like, I don't know, 3 to 5 years of AppSec, for sure, like that's probably, a view that you might have. But and they talk, this author talks about it. The reality is that it's present everywhere. And just to sort of give people an idea of what truly insecure direct object reference is. It's like, if you're pulling, it doesn't matter if you're pulling it's a resource that you can directly call for, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a lookup in your database where it's like, hey, find an invoice by this name or this value, an ID, a name, whatever it might be. Look that up, and whatever it's user input that it's taking to do that lookup. The user can obviously, if it's not, there's no authorization check, and at no point does anyone or any of the code have some sort of protection to say, hey, here's the thing you're looking for. You're requesting of our application, but hey, like, you don't have permissions. So if that breakdown occurs and there's no authorization check there, then you can just directly call for the resource. I think that's pretty easy to grep and to understand. Where it gets pretty nuanced, and this is where I want to drive a little bit further into this report, and where it gets a little interesting, is they did a breakdown of where is it commonly found, right? The number one place is inside of REST APIs. At 31.8% of these reports were in the RESTful API section. So this is where I think it gets interesting, because the vanilla case is like doing user.find, ID equals some user input. The user input changes that number from 1 to 2 or 3, 4, whatever, and then it returns a different user object, and voila, you got some IDOR. That's oftentimes in, especially like complicated apps that have RESTful APIs. I've found in my experience, it's not always that simple. A lot of times, again, and just in my experience, there's typically multiple, and especially true of languages like Ruby or Python, where there's a bit of abstraction at times. There can be a breakdown. There might be 4 or 5 places that need to get things right in order for authorization to correctly occur. So it's not necessarily as simple as just a lookup. Like, I can give you a case of a report recently we got through our bounty program, and looking at it, it took a couple of us really squinting our eyes to realize how it actually occurred. It was the most nuanced thing ever. And it definitely wasn't some simple, like, find by whatever. It was, here's some conditionals, and here's some assumptions about where access control happened, and things like that. So that's a bit abstract without being able to show code. But that's the part that I found interesting, is that RESTful APIs are the number one culprit. And I can see why, because RESTful APIs typically have a bit of abstraction, have a bit of, maybe controllers or logic that they're inheriting from, methods they're overriding, helpers they're including, libraries they're including, and all of that abstraction can lead to not a simple and easy vanilla IDOR, but rather one that's a little bit more complicated to find.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, Ken, right? Like, the more complex authorization matrix an application has, the more likely it is to have IDOR vulnerabilities, because it introduces all of those edge cases where it's like, okay, you are, like, it's not just you have a user and an administrator. It's you've got a user with some administrative privileges. How do those privileges apply to each of those different endpoints? And when we forget that, there is this one other RESTful API over here that can return user data in certain situations, but we're not checking to make sure that this user is not an administrator. We're only looking at a specific privilege. Now we're returning back the password hash or something like that, right? Like, it becomes an exercise in how good are our unit tests for our authorization matrix over, are we actually doing authorization checks, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why we find it in almost every single application that we test, is those authorization matrices get so complex that no one person can keep that in their head. So it's easy enough to make sure that, hey, I can get access to those resources when I'm doing my functional testing, but I'm not doing the inverse case. And it's hard to know what those inverse cases should look like.
Yeah, like I will give you a concrete, I mean, take GitHub, for example. We've got enterprises, and enterprises can own multiple orgs, and orgs can have multiple types of teams, users, and those users and teams can have various roles. And those roles can be at an org level, a user level, a repo level. And then you start factoring in GitHub apps, OAuth apps, personal access tokens, what version of the personal access tokens. And so you get this now, when you get a token, it's like, where did the token originate from? Okay. Now who installed that? Let's say the token's for, I don't know, is it a server to server or a user to server flow? Because for GitHub apps, there's both. There's both user to server flows and server to server flows, and they have different permission sets and different expectations. So then you say, okay, well, we know what this is for now. Cool. We'll say a user to server token. Cool. So is this GitHub app installed with the right permissions by the right user for the right resource? Okay, cool. Now now that we've aligned all of that, now for that resource that you're calling for, what do the permission schemas look like now that we've identified all the other factors? Cool. So then, you get into these situations where it's like, well, that's, it seems like an easy, like, like you said, like, do you have admin rights? But when you really break it down, it becomes holy crap, there's a lot of places where a lot of things have to be checked. Now, to your point, the best way, and one of the ways that we tackle this problem, is through a very, very robust and somewhat complex, just given the nature of what it does, testing framework, authorization specific testing framework that you can literally just plug into an endpoint. So if you're adding a new RESTful endpoint, you can put in, you can call on this, it's kind of like a DSL, like a language in and of its own. And you can call on that DSL to then like say, hey, has permissions for this and is an integrator of that and has been an installation or is an installation of this. And you can have all these, like, this really robust framework helps you just basically make it very easy to test your assumptions, both authorization, negative and positive test cases against those endpoints that you add.
Yeah. Well, and this is, I mean, honestly, like, so in the secure code review course, right, when we talk about authorization functions and the ability to identify what's doing the authorization for any endpoint, this is the reason that we talk about it, is because it is so complex. I mean, one of my favorite IDOR vulnerabilities that I identified was actually through source code review in an application typical to, or similar to what you're doing at GitHub, where there was multiple organizations in the same environment. They all had administrators and then users underneath that. But we found, like, in the actual, like, editing of an organization's, like, applications that were in there, that as long as you were an administrator of an organization, like, you could edit an application. You couldn't actually see the application, but you could make changes to it, because on the update, of that application, it was only checking whether or not you had admin privileges, not admin privileges on that application in that organization, right? Like, it was basically they missed one, and that was it. They just basically missed putting in, hey, I need to specify the organization in here as well. And that was it. That one was fairly easy to fix, but finding it, on the other hand, unless you've got a framework like you're talking about where you've built that out, you would never actually see it, because you would go and see, and, as a tester, if I'm testing a RESTful API dynamically, most of the time I'm going to hit that Git endpoint. I can't look up the application. I'm probably not going to push that update to see if I can change someone else's ID, especially when those IDs have to be some sort of good value or they're hard to discover, right? Like, there's other things. And I think that's what the article goes into there, is those edge cases is where you can make a lot of money as a bug bounty researcher, because they are so difficult to find. And it's not just changing 1 to 2, it's changing GUID values, it's testing all these different endpoints, it's actually putting in the time to discover where those exist.
Yeah, most of our people that get paid out for high-end bounties, they've spent a lot of time understanding our authorization. Honestly, better than some of the people that work for us.
Yeah.
Not on the security. Well, I don't want to get. Anyway, like just saying, like there are people that definitely understand our authorization framework better than even possibly newer folks to GitHub for sure. So. They have to invest a lot of time is what I'm trying to say. But this article was, I think, interesting just because like it kind of, identified like where these things are happening. And I kind of smiled when I saw the RESTful aspect of that, because I was like, that really aligns well with where I would expect it to occur, Anyways, it's interesting. I think it's a fun read. It doesn't take long to consume. It's a few minute read, honestly. But it's pretty cool. And so success in finding IDOR. So one of the bullet points is success in finding IDORs sometimes comes from creative ways. Success of discovering IDORs comes from finding those in creative ways is what I'm trying to say. Or me summarizing what they're saying. And that can be true because it's oftentimes not just changing the number around. So
because you get
that's a fun one.
Yeah, it is. Just because you get a response that says user not authorized to see this resource doesn't mean that there's not insecure. No. There's not IDOR. That's what your takeaway should be, especially if you're a researcher or you're doing penetration testing or you're looking at API like from a source code perspective, right? Because we find it's always there at some level. It's always there.
My favorite IDOR ever is still David Filio's Rot 13 discovery. And I think I've talked about this before maybe once on the podcast before, but screw it, I'll say it again. It was the coolest thing ever. I think it was, I forget who, it wasn't David Filio who originally, I don't think it was him who actually had found that there was like this, for PDFs, there was like this value that looked like gobbledygook, but the dot PDF part of it was always the same, but it was like Rot 13. So somebody was like, why is this never changed? Like clearly there's got to be, if this dot extension never changes, like what? Because we didn't have source code. It was just black box. That's how we pen tested back then 12 years ago or whatever it was, 13 years ago. So anyways, like they're like, this is clearly that part's not changing. So there's got to be an algorithm here. And David Filio's like, wait, I'm pretty sure this is Rot 13. And for those that are not familiar, Rot 13 is just like a very basic cipher. You just rotate that through the alphabet 13 characters, and that's how you like obfuscate each letter. So like then they just like started converting once they figured out the name of the PDF file and like the general naming convention, they just generated with Rot 13 a bunch of things through into burp, and then boom, you got all your downloads for all the PDFs that you shouldn't have. That was probably the most fun. It just made me laugh. Like someone was actually using Rot 13 to prevent IDOR. Amaze balls. Like that was great.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
We may need to build that into a CTF or something, but yeah, cool. Yeah. Well, sweet. I know there was another, we wanted to get into pen testing stories. Maybe we'll do that next week, Ken. There was a Twitter thread. We'll keep that in our back pocket. We have
I've got some
IDOR ones and other things.
3, and one of them is a physical pen test that I want to talk about. So yeah, we should dedicate. Yeah. I think next week we have a couple guests that we might have on. We'll find out if we don't have guests on next week for scheduling. We should dedicate a significant amount of time to that because it's fun. It's fun to talk about pen test stories and all the horrible stuff we've found over the years.
It's all been so secure. Like we don't have any stories at all. That's But no, we'll dedicate an episode to that in the near future. Also, watch out for After Dark episodes. There will be another one upcoming. I want to do it again pretty soon. I know Ken does as well. And if you have recommendations or you want us to look at something, let us know. We may pick one of those from the European Commission, right, and go after that. But we're talking about it.
That Udo one I think looked interesting. If that's the CRM one, I can't remember, but
yeah, it is. Yeah, that Udo or even Mastodon looks interesting. I think there's been more eyes on Mastodon too. So anyway, we'll take a look at it. Jump into our Slack channel, join the conversation. Thank you for your support and listening to us. Right, Ken and I, this is a labor of love. Like we like to chat. So join the conversation. Let us know if there's something that you want us to change. There's new swag that's going to be coming pretty soon too. So yeah, join us in Omaha. I don't know what else. Let's just wrap it up, Ken.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next week, and we're going to share some fun stories if we don't have guests on, which we'll find out. But yeah, thanks.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.